Okay, so column stacks. How do we size columns? Inside Foundation 6, there are four different column stacks. There's a one column, two, three, four. Okay. I'm going to review the two column stack primarily today. The settings are extremely similar. It's just essentially, having more columns for the other ones. So there's, obviously more sizing options in the four column than there is the one column. Okay. Let's look at some of these, right? So here we have the sizing for column one and the sizing for column two. And if you're familiar with Foundation 1, you'll notice that there is still the 12 based grid. So essentially imagine that the column stack is broken up into 12 equal units. And you're going to tell exactly how many of those units this column is going to take up. And then I see break that down into the percentages as well. So you can see the actual percentage that ID will take up. So a 1 will take up 8%. As you see over here in edit mode, that's really tiny. So obviously for something like text, 1 isn't going to be good. You'll notice that there are two new options here. There is auto and there is shrink to content. Shrink to content is really powerful, especially if you're using like maybe little icons or something like that, where the column will actually shrink down to the size of its content. Now, what auto will do is it'll take up as much space as possible, but it'll also be nice to leave space for other things as well. So if you notice here, the default in this two column stack is small auto and small auto on column 1 and 2. What that does is when both columns are set to auto, it'll evenly split those up. Okay. But you'll notice if I set this to be, let's say 5. So when column 1 is set to 5, column 2, since it's still set to auto, it'll eat up the rest of the space, which is 7. Because columns 1 and 2 should equal 12. Okay, if you want them to be on the same row. Now, a lot of times what's very common is maybe on small, you will go to 12 on column 1 and 2. But then on medium, maybe you go 6 and 6, right? This is how we can get responsive sizing. So if we open this in a browser, you'll notice that on medium devices and large devices as well, we have a 2 column. But then as I shrink down, when we get to small size, you'll notice that they both collapse to be 1. They take up the entire width. So this is how we can get some responsive sizing. So that on small, it'll take a particular width or maybe full width. And then on medium and large, we can do something different. Now, if you notice, by default, large is inherit, and it'll always inherit from the smaller setting, right? So here, since we didn't define a large, it'll just use the medium sizing. And if we didn't define medium sizing, it would just use whatever is defined in small, okay? So it always inherits up. Now, by default, these columns have no gutters at all. So there's no spacing in between the columns on the outside or in between them. We can easily add that by simply using margin. So this will add margin to the left and to the right, the top and the bottom. And this will add padding to the top, to the left and right. And this will add to the top and the bottom. So if you want to add some padding, this is just a quick and dirty way. If you want more detailed padding, you can definitely use swatches for that. Now, these next options allow us to define the horizontal alignment of our columns. Essentially, if your columns are taking up the entire width, you're not going to really notice this setting. Where you're going to notice it is, let's say, for example, I wanted column 1 to be 5, and I wanted column 2 to also be 5. Since 5 plus 5 equals 10, it's not taking up the entire width of 12 units, right? So by default, they're going to be aligned left. But we can change that. We can align them centered. We can align them to the right. We can align them justified, which is basically space them out. And if you notice, it basically puts each one on the ends. And then there's also spaced, which is basically evenly space them out in the area that they're in. This horizontal alignment, along with, the sizing options, really gives us a lot of control of how our columns are going to be aligned with each other. Now, for vertical alignment, this is good when your columns have different content. By default, they will actually align towards the top, okay, which is the default. You can also align them to the middle. And if you notice, what that does is it aligns all the content within the middle of their columns. Now, similar to the container stack, you can actually define the content alignment within everything that's defined within these columns. So you can do center aligned, left aligned, justify the content. And then you could define different alignments for your content on small, medium, and large. And just like a lot of other stacks throughout Foundation 6, we have full visibility control, so you can hide or show this content on particular devices. And then you have all the custom classes to use with swatches.